You can't be serious, David. We're leaving him here. Lena's voice cracked as she stared at her husband, her hand still clenched around the leash. The dog Rufus sat at her feet, panting, tail wagging gently, unaware that the world he trusted was about to collapse. David didn't even look back. He was already opening the back door for their 2 kids, tossing snacks and toys inside like they were on a road trip, not in the middle of betrayal. We don't have space. I told you, Lena. He's old. He's slowing us down. We'll be back in 20 minutes. He won't even notice. But Rufus did notice when the car pulled out of the dusty Oklahoma gas station and disappeared into the shimmering heat waves of Highway 81. He ran for nearly a mile. Then he stopped. Not because he gave up, because something in him shattered. And when he collapsed near a trash bin beside the air pump, whimpering and confused, it wasn't pain that broke him. It was the realization they weren't coming back. The gas station clerk, Jerome, an ex-Marine with tired eyes and a limp that never healed, watched from behind the smudged window. He'd seen breakups, drunks, and drug deals in this place, but this dog, waiting under the same broken ice sign for hours, tail twitching every time a white SUV pulled in, it did something to him. By evening, a thunderstorm rolled in. Rufus was still there, soaked, shivering, his eyes locked on the road. Jerome stepped out finally, grumbling, "I ain't got time for this heartbreak." He tossed a blanket over the dog and slid a bowl of microwaved sausage links beside him. Rufus didn't eat that night. Jerome didn't sleep either. Over the next few days, something strange happened. Truckers began asking about the dog. One of them, Mariah, a weathered woman with a phoenix tattoo on her neck, left behind an old coat so he'd have something warm. Another, a man named Colt, sat beside him for an hour, drinking coffee and mumbling stories about a mutt he lost in Kandahar and Rufus as he stayed in the same spot, watching, waiting, until the moment something clicked, something changed. He rose, not with a wag of a tail or a hopeful bark, but with purpose. Quietly, he walked to the road. He stood there, eyes squinting at the horizon, as if trying to remember the scent of betrayal. And then he began to walk, limping, steady, alone, no leash, no food, no plan. Just a broken heart on 4 legs and a memory that refused to die. What no one knew yet, not even Jerome, who'd come to the gas station early just to check on him, was that this wasn't just about a dog finding his way home. This was about justice, and a reunion no one would see coming. The first mile nearly broke him. Rufus's legs wobbled beneath his weight, and the old wound on his hind leg, long healed, but never forgotten, began to throb with each step. His tongue dragged from his mouth, dry and heavy, his breathing shallow. But something deeper than instinct pushed him forward. Not hunger, not fear, memory. The back seat where the youngest child used to rest his head on Rufus's chest during storms, the scent of Lena's shampoo when she'd hold him during winter nights. Even the sharp voice of David, impatient and cold, was embedded in the sounds he searched for. Rufus didn't understand cruelty the way humans did, but he knew absence. He felt it like a wound that couldn't scab over. Back at the gas station, Jerome stood in the rain, arms crossed, face twisted in concern as he stared down the road Rufus had taken. Something about that dog haunted him, maybe because it reminded him of Afghanistan, of a bomb-sniffing shepherd who once saved his squad and vanished the next day into the desert. Maybe because he'd never believed in the idea that dogs had a soul until now. But Jerome didn't chase after him. He simply whispered, "Go find what's yours, soldier," and turned back into the dull yellow glow of his station, not realizing the next time he'd see Rufus, the entire country would already know his name. Rufus limped along old service roads and dirt shoulders for days. He was spotted by a roadside flower vendor in Chickasha, Oklahoma, who fed him a slice of sandwich ham and posted his photo online. "Lost dog, refuses to come near, keeps watching the highway, broke my heart." That photo was shared 300 times in 12 hours, but Rufus didn't stay long. As the sun rose, he vanished again. By the 5th day, he was seen near the outskirts of El Reno, covered in mud, crossing fields like a ghost. Farmers tried to catch him. Children left bowls of cereal and bread slices near their mailboxes. Still, Rufus avoided contact. He had a mission that none of them could understand. Meanwhile, Lena sat in a sterile new rental house outside Santa Fe, her knuckles white as she clutched the remote. She hadn't spoken to David in hours. Ever since they reached the new house, the silence had become unbearable. David didn't apologize. He didn't even mention Rufus. The kids had asked once, "Where's Rufy?" And David had coldly replied, "He'll find a new home. Dogs always do." But Lena wasn't sleeping. The guilt had planted roots inside her, and now as she scrolled her phone late one night, she froze. There, on her screen, was a blurry image of a muddy, limping dog in front of a school bus stop, his tail low, his eyes locked on the highway. She didn't even realize she was crying until her thumb slipped on the screen. "David, it's him," she whispered. But David didn't move. He was already asleep, headphones on, pretending none of this existed. The next twist in Rufus's journey came without warning. On day 7, as he crossed a gravel parking lot behind an abandoned motel in Amarillo, 2 teens spotted him. One of them, trying to get a video for his social media, tossed a stone to get Rufus's attention. It hit him square in the ribs. Rufus yelped, fell, then struggled back to his feet. But before they could laugh or throw again, a mechanic named Gloria, covered in oil and fury, stormed out from behind her shop and unleashed a rage no teenager was prepared for. They ran. Rufus didn't. He collapsed beside a pile of tires, shaking. Gloria dropped to her knees. She wasn't gentle. She wasn't soft-spoken, but her hands were steady, and her voice didn't lie. I don't know what the hell you've been through, old boy, but no one throws rocks at something this loyal. Not on my watch. For 2 days, Rufus rested in her garage on a blanket that smelled of diesel and lavender. She posted his photo. No collar, scar on left hind, hasn't barked once. Watches the door like he's waiting for someone. Anyone know this dog this time? The photo went viral. Not just shares news coverage. Mystery dog walking Route 66 alone, possibly searching for family. Reporters began calling him the gas station ghost, piecing together sightings, compiling maps. Truckers hung flyers. A local vet offered to care for him free of charge. Gloria refused to take money, but she gave him a name. You're not just a dog anymore, you're a damn symbol. I'll call you Echo, because you're chasing something you still hear in your heart. But Rufus Echo only stayed until the limp faded. Then he was gone again. 2 weeks had passed, over 190 miles covered. And then, one morning in a quiet cul-de-sac in Santa Fe, the sound of claws on pavement echoed outside Lena's new home. The youngest child was sitting on the porch when he saw the figure limping toward him. At first, he blinked, then blinked again. Mom, he called softly. Mom, it's Rufy. Lena dropped her coffee. When she stepped outside and saw him emaciated, limping, ribs showing, tail uncertain, something broke inside her. Not a scream, not a sob, just a collapse to her knees as Rufus froze, 20 feet away, unsure if this time he'd be welcomed or rejected again. She didn't hesitate. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Please come home, she whispered, and then he ran straight into her arms. The boy cried. The neighbors stepped out. David stood inside, watching through the blinds, face unreadable, but Rufus didn't care. He buried his head into Lena's lap, letting her sob into his neck, as if he was comforting her. What came next would turn a once-abandoned dog into a national headline. But before the cameras, the interviews, and the books, there was just this, a broken-hearted dog who walked across states, not just to return home but to remind those who left him behind what real loyalty truly meant. The reunion should have been the end. That was what everyone thought. The moment Rufus collapsed into Lena's arms, body shaking, breath ragged, heart pounding from miles of ache and betrayal, it felt like the story had closed itself. But some wounds don't just scar. They infect everything around them. And in this family there was one person whose silence was far louder than any bark or cry. David. He didn't step outside that morning. While Lena and the kids wept in the front yard, neighbors snapping photos, a reporter from the local news rushing over with wide eyes and a microphone, David stood behind the curtain, arms crossed. His jaw was tight, eyes cold. That dog was supposed to be gone, out of their lives, forgotten. And yet, here he was, dragging back not just a body but the weight of every selfish choice David had made in the last year. Lena sensed it immediately, even as Rufus slowly healed, his ribs filling out again, his tail beginning to wag cautiously. There was tension in the house. David didn't pet him, didn't speak his name. If the dog happened to pass by him, David would shift slightly to avoid contact. It was as if guilt had grown teeth inside him, gnawing at whatever humanity he still had left. The twist came on a Tuesday morning, barely a week after Rufus returned. Lena was gone to the grocery store. The kids were upstairs getting ready for school, and David stood in the kitchen staring at the dog bed. Rufus was lying there, one paw curled under his chin, eyes half closed but alert, always alert, watching the door, watching him. I should have left you where I found you, David muttered, voice barely audible. But Rufus heard. His ears twitched, his gaze shifted. David stepped closer. There was something in his expression that had no place in a home, something cruel and unfinished. You think you're some kind of hero now. You embarrassed me. You made me look like the villain. He picked up a half-empty mug from the counter and smashed it into the sink. Rufus didn't flinch. He simply rose, slow and steady, his eyes not afraid but disappointed. And that broke something in David. You're just a dog, he hissed. You don't get to judge me. But someone else did. A soft gasp from the hallway. The youngest child, Max, had come down the stairs early. He stood frozen, backpack slung over one shoulder, staring at his father in disbelief. David turned, startled. It's not what it looked like, he began, but the words felt hollow. Max didn't say a word. He walked past his father, knelt down beside Rufus, and hugged him tightly. Then, without looking back, he said quietly, I'm telling Mom. The story didn't stay within those walls. Not for long. After the viral reunion video had racked up nearly 4 million views, Lena had begun receiving calls in animal shelters, media outlets, even a small documentary crew offering to cover Rufus's journey. One of those calls came from a retired behavioral psychologist named Dr. Celia Brandt. She specialized in canine trauma and emotional resilience and had seen Rufus's story on her niece's TikTok feed. She asked if she could meet him. Not for the cameras. For the truth. Lena agreed. The moment Dr. Brandt stepped into their home, Rufus stood up and walked to her, not cautiously, but deliberately. He leaned his head against her thigh as if to say, "You see me, don't you?" She did. After spending 2 hours with the family watching, observing, listening, she asked Lena a question that stopped her cold. "Has anyone in this house tried to hurt him again?" Lena blinked. "No. I don't think so, but..." Her eyes flicked toward David, and for the first time, she noticed something. Rufus never turned his back on him, not even once. That night, Lena asked the kids to be honest, and Max told her everything. The mug, the words, the look on David's face. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She packed a bag by sunrise. David came downstairs to an empty living room. Rufus was gone. So was Lena and the kids. All that remained was a printed email, folded on the kitchen counter. It was from the local sheriff's office, an official statement that Lena had filed a protective notice for the dog, citing previous incidents of abandonment and possible abuse. There was no signature, just a post-it note on top. "He's not just a dog, he's the one who never gave up on us." David never saw Rufus again, but the world did. In the weeks that followed, Rufus became a symbol, not just for loyalty, but for truth. Animal shelters began using his image on billboards. If a dog can find his way back, maybe you can too. A best-selling children's book was written about him. He was invited to a live television event where he sat calmly beside a young girl with autism, gently pressing his head into her lap as the cameras rolled. Lena and the kids moved to a new home, quiet, peaceful. Rufus had a yard now and a wide porch he liked to nap on during the golden hour. But every now and then, he'd still sit by the gate, staring out at the road, not with pain, not with longing, just remembering. Echoes of a journey that had nearly broken him, but instead made him eternal. And in the heart of one shattered man, somewhere far away, a ghost still lingered. Not every redemption comes for those who wait. Some come only to those who deserve it. Months passed, but Rufus's story refused to fade. Across the country, his name had become more than a headline. Schools used his journey as a lesson in loyalty. Families used his story to teach compassion. And for millions online, the sight of an old dog limping across highways in search of the ones who left him behind became a mirror, a reminder of everything they'd loved, lost, and maybe still hoped to find again. But fame does strange things, and not all of them are kind. Lena never intended to become a public figure. She hadn't set out to profit from Rufus's pain, but as offers poured in, book deals, interviews, even a licensing agreement for a cartoon adaptations, she found herself at a crossroads. The attention was overwhelming, and though she tried to shield the kids from it, Max and Olivia were old enough to notice the whispers at school, the way strangers pointed at their dog as if he were a monument instead of a soul who'd suffered. Still, she thought they were safe. Until one night, a knock came at the door. Just after 10 p.m. she hesitated before answering it. On the other side stood a man in a dark brown jacket, hands buried deep in his pockets, beard unkempt, eyes glassy. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. Then the scent of stale smoke hit her. Her stomach dropped. "David," she said, voice sharp with disbelief. He didn't answer, just looked past her toward the living room where Rufus lay sleeping by the fireplace. "I came to see him," he finally muttered. "No," Lena said instantly. "You need to leave now." David took a slow step forward. "He was my dog too." "No," she repeated, louder now. "It was never yours. You don't get to claim loyalty when you were the one who shattered it." David's mouth twitched. The man she'd once married, the man who once raised his voice at a child for spilling milk, was unraveling. There was no remorse in his eyes, only entitlement, as if time and distance had erased what he'd done. "I saw the news," he said bitterly. "Saw the money, the attention. Funny how you only remembered the dog when he made you famous." Lena stared at him, disgust twisting her gut. "He didn't make me famous, he made me human again." And then something unexpected happened. Rufus stirred. The door was still ajar, and though his hearing had dulled with age, he recognized that voice, that vibration, that smell. Slowly he rose, not with joy, not with a wagging tail, but with caution, and he walked to the front hallway, posture rigid, eyes locked on the figure he once chased down highways for. David smiled faintly. "There he is." But Rufus didn't approach. He stood between Lena and the doorway, his body angled defensively, a low rumble built in his throat, not a growl, not quite, but enough. A warning. A memory made flesh. David took one step closer. That was a mistake with a speed no one expected from an aging dog. Rufus lunged not to attack but to push. His chest slammed into David's knee, enough to knock the man back a step, and then stood firm, still silent, still watching, like a soldier who'd drawn a line in the sand. Lena stepped forward and shut the door between them. This time there was no hesitation. The next morning she filed for a restraining order. Not just for her, but for Rufus, because loyalty deserved protection too. But the story wasn't over yet. 2 weeks later, an anonymous email arrived. It was addressed to the local news station that had first aired Rufus's story. In it were attachments, grainy footage from a truck stop surveillance camera. The date stamp was from nearly a year ago. The images showed a white SUV pulling away, From a gas station in the corner of the frame, barely visible, was a dog chasing after it. A whistleblower had leaked the footage, and it confirmed what many suspected but few could prove. Rufus hadn't been lost. He'd been abandoned deliberately, with malice. The station ran a follow-up story, this time naming David Caldwell as the man behind the wheel. Legal consequences followed quickly. Animal abandonment laws had strengthened in recent years, and with video evidence, the case moved fast. David was charged with misdemeanor neglect and fined heavily, but more importantly, he was publicly shamed. The court of opinion of the internet, of the community, of the very people who had once dismissed Rufus as just a dog, came down on him like a wave. And Rufus, he didn't know about charges or headlines. He didn't know that his photo was now framed in the office of every veterinary school in the state. But he did know peace, and he began to heal in ways no vet could. Track. He started barking again, soft, short barks when the kids came home from school. He began playing with toys that had once sat untouched. His tail, which once hung like a forgotten flag, now wagged freely. He no longer watched the gate. He had no reason to. For the first time in years, he was no longer waiting. And one evening, as the sun slipped below the horizon and the porch lights flickered on, Lena sat beside him on the steps, her hand resting on his back. "You did something incredible," she whispered. "You reminded all of us what love really looks like." Rufus looked up at her, eyes cloudy but shining with something ancient, something true. The world had abandoned him, but he had never abandoned hope, and that was the part of the story no one would ever forget. The world eventually moved on, as it always does. Headlines faded, hashtags went quiet, and the story of Rufus, the gas station dog who crossed miles to return to the family who left him, slowly drifted from trending topics to memory. But for Lena and her children, Rufus was never a viral moment. He was home. They had moved again, this time by choice. Not to escape David or the noise surrounding the trial, but to begin fresh in a quiet town near the Colorado foothills, a place where the air smelled of pine and soil after rain, and where every sunrise seemed to wash the world clean. The house was smaller, simpler, but it had a fenced yard, a garden Max had begun planting with his science teacher's help, and a screened-in porch where Rufus now spent most of his afternoons, his body curled on an old woven rug, his head resting between his paws, eyes half closed in peace. Rufus was aging fast. The vet said it was likely the stress, the miles, the emotional toll of his journey. His back legs didn't carry him as far anymore, and sometimes his breathing grew shallow when the air turned cold. But Lena never left his side for long, neither did the kids. Max read to him every night short chapters from adventure books, his voice calm and steady. Olivia, now old enough to understand what had happened, had started drawing pictures of their family that always included Rufus in the center, a crown on his head made of leaves or clouds. And still, even in his slowing body, Rufus had more to give. The local school had invited Lena to speak for a Kindness Week program, and though she was hesitant at first, she eventually stood before a gym full of children and told them what it meant to be loyal, what it meant to forgive. She didn't dramatize the story. She didn't show photos or play videos. She just described a dog who walked across the state to find the ones who left him. Not because he wanted attention, but because he still believed in the love he had once been given. After that, a woman from a nearby hospice center reached out. They'd heard about Rufus and wondered if he was up to it, whether he might visit once a week, just to sit, just to be there. Lena wasn't sure. Rufus was tired, but something in his eyes flickered at the sound of the woman's voice during the call, as if he understood, as if he wanted one more purpose, and so it began. Every Wednesday afternoon, Lena would help Rufus into the back seat of the car and drive him to the hospice. They didn't ask him to perform. They didn't force interaction. They simply let him walk or be carried into the common room, where he would find a spot by someone's chair or beside a quiet bed. He never barked, never whined. But something in his presence, his calm, his story brought a stillness no medicine could offer. There was one man in particular, Henry, a retired railroad conductor who rarely spoke to anyone. But when Rufus curled beside his wheelchair one day, the old man reached down, ran a shaking hand over the dog's fur, and whispered, "You waited too, huh?" After that, Henry asked about Rufus every week, and so the dog who had once been discarded became something sacred, a bridge between silence and healing, a witness to the truth that love, once planted, could grow again even in broken places. But time, as always, moved forward. One evening, after a long spring day filled with soft wind and the scent of blooming lilacs, Rufus didn't get up from the porch rug. He wasn't in pain. He wasn't afraid. He simply looked up at Lena, gave a gentle exhale, and closed his eyes. She sat beside him in silence, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the rhythm grow slower, softer, until it faded like a song reaching its final note. Max came outside minutes later. He didn't speak. He just knelt and placed one of his drawings beside Rufus's paw. It showed a house in the hills, a garden, a dog on the porch, and above it, a sky full of stars. They buried Rufus under the tallest tree in the yard, the one with the widest shade. Olivia placed a painted stone on the grave that read, "He came home, he stayed, he healed us." In the days that followed, letters arrived from people they'd never met. A woman from New York who said Rufus gave her the courage to leave an abusive marriage. A teenager from Nebraska who said the story helped him stop self-harming. A widower from Florida who said the dog reminded him that some love never dies, even when the person or the pet is gone. Lena read each one aloud to the kids, and every time, she finished with the same words. He was more than a dog. He was a survivor, a guardian, a lesson that loyalty isn't a leash but a choice, and sometimes the purest form of it comes not from humans, but from the very beings we too often take for granted. Years later, long after the news had gone quiet, long after Rufus's paw prints had faded from the porch, a statue was unveiled in the town square of their little community. It wasn't large, just a bronze sculpture of an old dog standing beside a road sign marked Hope. Beneath it, a plaque read, "In memory of Rufus who walked the road, not for attention, not for revenge, but because love was stronger than fear." And in the hearts of everyone who knew his story, one truth remained unshaken. Some heroes don't wear capes. Some just keep walking even after being left behind.